It's indeed a pleasure to have Colonel Anil Athale with us here to speak about the legacy of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj the Great. I mean, even now, I read about Shivaji Maharaj in school. We were taught in school at that time. And even now, when you read his stories, I mean, it gives you really goosebumps when you read of how Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj the Great, as a ruler, was an exemplary military strategist. His guerrilla warfare tactics, his weapons, which include the bagnak, the tiger claw. He was called as the mountain rat because his earlier part of his major kingdom was in the western Sahyadris. His vision, his vision as a great administrator, his vision as an emperor who wanted to build his navy. He's called as the father of Indian Navy, and that's for some reason. So, I mean, to talk about Shivaji Maharaj, and for somebody who has written so well about his entire regime and even the Maratha Empire after Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, is something I'm sure which everybody will be totally captivated to. I'm sure, may I request everyone to either switch off your cell phones or put it on silent mode, please, all the children. Thank you so much. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you see, one can talk endlessly, but before I go on too much about what Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was and, how he was, sir, yeah, we would like to hear from you. I mean, this book is in detail about his total regime, but then we would like to hear from you of his valor, his strategies, the guerrilla warfare tactics, his administration, how his legacy eventually continued, and the building of the Maratha Empire. And incidentally, to be on record, the British acquired India not from the Mughals but from the Marathas, because the Marathas were the ones who were controlling large parts of India, and it was the British who fought Marathas to acquire India. So, sir, my first question to you while I was going through all this is that there's so much that you have spoken about his naval strategies, his military strategies, yes. The ruling of Marathas, how they were as administrators. I mean, most of the times in India, when we find it, is the mention is of the Mughals, and thereafter of the Britishers and the freedom struggle. Somehow that intervening period of the Marathas is missing somewhere. And not many books have been published. And let me also mention to you that most of the Maratha records were kind of Shivaji's rule particularly, were destroyed in the 1689 Battle of Raigad. So, and you found everything, your research, and then you chose to write about this. Of course, being a historian and also a war expert probably would have prompted you, but we would like to hear from you of why you thought about this, and you could continue on with the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj legacy as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Firstly, I can switch into 3 languages, so whatever you are comfortable and I am comfortable with. You know how this journey started? While I was working as the head of the history division in the Ministry of Defense, one of our old military historians, General Palit, incidentally, his wife was from Nagpur, from the Nagpur Bhosle family. So he had a great connection with the Marathas. So he asked me a question that all over India, and he himself being a very major historian, military historian, he said, look, the Marathas fought so bravely against the Mughal Empire, ultimately created their own empire. That much is known. But he says somehow it so seemed to happen that they didn't fight against the British. How is it that they just succumbed to the English? So is it that they really succumbed without a fight against the British? Or the second question, he says the British have deliberately put that episode of Indian history under the carpet so that the Indians should not be aware that they actually fought against the British. And he said, I want you to find that answer to that question. I said, yes, I will search for this answer. But as a historian, my profession tells me that history is basically search for truth. Search for truth as much as your ability tells you. It is neither to be colored with what the rulers or the people want to hear or would like to hear. So I said, in case I find that the Marathas actually succumbed without any fight to the British, will you accept it? He said, yes. So with that, the whole thing started. But to talk of Marathas and Maratha history and their empire, you cannot begin unless you understand the founder of the Maratha Empire, that is Chhatrapati Shivaji, Shivaji the Great. Now, this phrase Shivaji the Great, I felt, has been long denied to him, but interestingly, when he was alive and the governor of Portugal, incidentally, he used to write annual report to his king. Now, Portuguese were a very neutral kind of writers of the events of those times because they were neither pro-British nor pro-Mughals or pro-Marathas. So that governor of Goa, writing to his king in 1660, says that Shivaji the Great, or Shivaji, can be compared with Julius Caesar and Alexander. Those ancient people, Portuguese decided to compare him with those people. So, greatness of Shivaji, I don't have to have any qualms in calling him Shivaji the Great. The reason why, as a soldier, I find him most fascinating is that he, within himself, had three basic qualities, which almost for 1,000 years, there has not been an Indian produced of his caliber. First, he was a soldier par excellence. Historical data says that he was just about 5 feet 4 inches, something short by modern standards. But such was his physical strength that in the Battle of Pratapgarh, he physically took on Afzal Khan, who was something like 6 feet 2 inches tall or something. Second, his raid on Shaiste Khan. Imagine today, I think General Manoj Pandey is from Nagpur. Imagine the army chief, General Manoj Pandey, walking about at night 20-30 kilometers and launching a commando raid on enemy, say inside China or Pakistan or wherever. It's impossible to think of that. But here was Chhatrapati Shivaji as a king, as a head of the army, just with 40-50 people at night, disguised as a part of a marriage procession, Barati, and physically launching a raid, commando raid. I mean, there have been very few examples of that kind of physical soldierly qualities and attributes that any of the leaders have shown. After that, then you come to his second point. Why he is regarded as one of the greatest military figures in world is that look at his resources. When he started off with 12 people. 12 मावळे फक्त. त्याच्यातनं then he increased his strength, but in all the battles he fought, most interestingly, he had less number of soldiers than the enemy, and yet he won a victory. This is normally, in all military logic, when you have to attack and win a battle, it is regarded that you must have 1:3 superiority, normally. That is how that's a thumb rule of the military science. Here was a person who had 1/3 the strength of the enemy, and yet he won the battles. Now, how did he do that trick? That is where comes in his acumen as a strategist. Shivaji never fought a battle dictated by the enemy. He dictated the time, the place, and the method of fighting. And how did he do that? Because he had one of the most efficient spying establishment under Bahirji Naik. So whenever the Mughals or Vijapur armies used to be going through Maharashtra, before they reached a place, through his system of observation posts and what used to be called as harkares, there used to be runners from village to village. And most of those jobs were done incidentally by the Mahar community. Because the Mahars were in Maharashtra, most of the places where the village chowkidars, that is the job they used to do. And that is why they used to get these watans and land, etc., etc. So the Harkaras used to come and tell him, so he knew exactly where the enemy was. And then he would choose a place through a kinder or a pass where perforce they are climbing up the mountain, they are tired, and since he knew beforehand and his soldiers were fast moving, they would occupy places top of the hill, and the moment the enemy came within the range of his soldiers, they would attack, kill as many, get onto their horses and go back. Now this business of attacking and going back was almost revolutionary in India. What had happened was, over a long period of time, in India, wars had become ritualized. Daytime fighting, no night fighting, पाठीहून मार करायचा नाही, दूरून वार करायचा नाही. When you are fighting a war or a battle, these rules don't apply. War and the last bit of fighting was always very brutal, and it is the result that mattered. What happened was, over a period of almost 1,000 years, the Rajput method of fighting was more about the method than the result. Whereas for Chhatrapati Shivaji, it was the result that mattered. That was a very big change he brought about. Second major change he brought about was that we had this typical tendency that the moment you win a victory, you first start celebrating. Sometimes we want to celebrate even before the victory, like the last cricket match. So that was something he made sure, like for the instance, Battle of Pratapgarh. After his army ambushed Afzal Khan's army, he didn't wait to celebrate. Immediately his cavalry, that is horses, went all the way pursuing that army right up to Vijapur. He never gave a moment of respite to the enemy. That constant, what is called in military parlance as offensive action, you will not find in the entire 30-40 years of Chhatrapati Shivaji's warfare, that he has fought a defensive battle. One and the only defensive battle he was forced to fight was at Panhalgarh when he was surrounded. Otherwise, throughout his life, he was never surrounded, never pinned down, because he used to always move from one fort to another fort. And nobody knew where was Shivaji at this given time. It is through this constant movement, the enemy who wanted to catch him could never catch him, because the first to catch person, you have to know where he is. It is this constant war of movement creating local superiority and basically not investing any capital into who is in the possession of battlefield. What had happened was that other than Maharana Pratap, who was the first one to start guerrilla war in India, he again differed from the Rajput way of fighting, where you just stand and, I mean, it was like a fixed match kind of a thing, that both armies will come, stay in front of each other and sort of fight, and whosoever then possesses the battlefield is the victor. That entire grammar of warfare, Chhatrapati Shivaji changed.
So while you mentioned that he would always resort to offensive action and
Yes.
would not allow the army to go, do you feel that perhaps there was some kind of a breach that happened when Pratap Rao Gurjar and the Behlol Khan episode happened?
Yeah.
That I mean, his entire philosophy of not sparing the enemy, and he would not be really afraid of retreat. He would have no qualms of saying that let me retreat now and let me attack him tomorrow morning.
Yes.
So that entire method of warfare was changed. So was there some kind of a breach?
There is a, but before that, I think we have forgotten one more aspect, that is his building of Navy.
Navy, yeah. So
There has been very few Indians who had the kind of vision that he had. Two examples. His family belonged to a place near Verur that is in Marathwada. Mostly families came from there. His childhood is spent in Pune. His initial kingdom was in and around Pune, Rajgarh, Torana, Sinhgarh, these forts, etc. Then suddenly he chose Raigad and went to the coast, and then also built a navy, because he had seen the way Siddhi of Janjira, because of his navy, could never be defeated. That is one particular, you can say, minus point of Chhatrapati Shivaji's regime. He tried at least 3 or 4 times to try and capture Janjira fort. Could never succeed. He realized the value of navy. He also visualized very clearly that the Mughals are bound to come down to south to finish off his kingdom. So he did 3 things. Firstly, he invested and built a navy. All the money that he got from Surat was invested in building 7 or 8 sea forts. And he built a navy almost of 200 ships in 3-4 years' time. With a result, he had a capability of carrying 3,000 soldiers on board ships from, say, Alibag to Basrur, which is what he, in those days, carried out a naval exercise. And he himself went on ship at that time. Most interestingly, you will be surprised, today, in 21st century, India's capacity is to carry about 3,000 soldiers on ships. That he had achieved in 17th century. Look at the vision. Second, since he visualized that the Mughal whole army is likely to come to Maharashtra to finish him off, he firstly had the southern alliance with the Qutub Shahi and down south. His own half-brother was at Tanjavur, Penkoji.
Yes.
And he created a second capital at Jinji, where he had stored enough money, fodder and soldiers, so that once the Mughals come here, the capital will shift to Jinji, alternative capital. Modern India has started thinking of an alternative capital in case of a nuclear war only in 1980s. He had thought about it. There is a clear reference found about his alternative capital. That is where, when Aurangzeb with the entire Mughal army Aurangzeb shifted the capital to Aurangabad, and the entire Mughal force came down south to once and for all finish off Marathas and of course the southern sultanates. So here is a person who could think 20, 30 years ahead. Also, he was a great thinker who again in almost 1,000 years talked about Hindavi Swarajya. He never talked about Maratha Rajya, Maharashtra Rajya. He talked of Hindavi Swarajya, that is an all India or Indian state. And the word Swarajya, which again dates back to Rigveda in the stanzas, but the word Swarajya sort of resurfaces only in the 17th and 18th century with Chhatrapati Shivaji.
Would you like to dwell upon how he built his navy, how he took help from the Portuguese at that time, how he built, what was his vision around that, and eventually, could you also share some insight on how he fought the Portuguese, or would that be slightly out of context?
No, actually, the clash with the Portuguese and the British took place after him. That was the Battle of Kulaba. That was Battle of Kulaba. But before that, I would like to mention Panipat. I know in Maharashtra, especially, I remember I had gone to Kolhapur once and I was talking about Maratha history. So after the talk was over, a person came to me and said, you shouldn't mention Panipat. I said, why? He says, people don't like it. I said, but look, it is from the defeat and that we must learn. And unless we learn from our setbacks, we will never improve. So Panipat is one of the turning points in Indian history. And the reason why Marathas lost at Panipat have much to do that they had forgotten what Shivaji the Great had taught. For instance, when the Battle of Panipat was taking place, only half of the Maratha army was in the north. Marathas, including the Bhosles of Nagpur, Gaekwads, and about 30,000-40,000 soldiers, were engaged in fighting in south, somewhere near Arcot and other places. Only half of the Maratha army went up north. Contrast this with Chhatrapati Shivaji. When he had to fight the Mughals, the first thing he did immediately after Battle of Pratapgarh is he had a treaty of peace with Vijapur. When he wanted to fight Mughals, then immediately when he had wanted to fight Vijapur, he had treaty with Mughals. The moment he found that he has to fight with the Mughals, he had a treaty with Vijapur. And he made sure, how he managed that was that under force, he had to join the Mughals to fight against Vijapur Sultan. So he engineered defection of Netaji Palkar, not alone, but Netaji Palkar with about 3,000 Maratha cavalry. he claimed that he had a fight with Netaji, and Netaji has gone and joined the Vijapur. Under the Treaty of Purandar, he had to fight on the side of Mughal against the Vijapur. But his army was on the side of Vijapur, and Vijapur defeated the Mughals in that particular battle. So he always made sure that he never fought a two-front war. If he was in a situation that he had to fight on two fronts, he made sure that one side was. This is a great lesson not only for those times but even for today.
But while you're speaking about the Bijapur Empire, and also whenever the Marathas have not followed the strategies or the doctrine of Shivaji Maharaj, that is where they have faced failure. And this, we missed the episode of the Pratap Rao Gurjar and Behlol Khan. I mean, that episode where Pratap Rao Gurjar pardoned him, and if you could recite that, that would be very
Actually, if we can have the Vadgaon battle map, please.
And also with that, if you could cover the Vadgaon Treaty as well in that piece, so the link events could be linked well then.
In the early 18th century, that is 1779, by that time, the British had started sizable territorial acquisition. In Bengal side, they had come up to Allahabad. Madras, they were there. Bombay was still confined only to Bombay. And they were very keen on expanding their empire at the cost of Marathas. That is where they joined Raghunath Rao and tried to attack Pune in 1779. That is where, under Mahatji Shinde and Nana Fadnavis together, they plotted that they lured the British, just like Chhatrapati Shivaji had done during the Battle of Pratapgarh. They lured the British through the Ghats. Once they came up on top, Mahatji Shinde and his cavalry surrounded the British. And they made sure that they remained outside the range of the British guns and harassed them throughout. Marathas also did what is called the scorched earth policy, which later on the Russians were to follow against the Germans. That is, even a blade of grass and all grain and water, wells were poisoned, all the grain was destroyed. So when the British started advancing from Khandala towards Pune, their army did not have anything to eat. In the meanwhile, the Marathas who were in Konkan area, they went and attacked the British base at Khopoli. So their lines of communication to Bombay were cut off. And then the Marathas surrounded the British army at Vadgaon. Now, at that time, in whole of India, there were only 6,000 British soldiers. Out of them, close to 2,000 were surrounded at Vadgaon. And they didn't know what to do. It is at that time the Britishers asked for a truce. It is called the Treaty of Vadgaon. Britishers gave back Sashti Island, Vasai, which they had captured earlier, and said that we will not help Raghunath Rao. On that promise, the Marathas led the British off to go back to Bombay. Not only they permitted them to go back, they actually escorted them so that some robbers, etc., shouldn't do anything to them. This is in direct contrast to what Chhatrapati Shivaji did at Battle of Pratapgarh, and the lesson that Marathas had forgotten. There's an episode in his life where there was a Vijapur general called Behlol Khan. He was a very capable general, and he was very difficult to deal with. And at one stage, his chief of his army, Pratap Rao Gurjar, he had surrounded Behlol Khan. And Behlol Khan similarly said, asked talks for treaty, saying that, look, I will not again come back into the Maratha kingdom. So on that promise, Pratap Rao Gujar let him off. When Pratap Rao Gujar came back, though he was Chhatrapati Shivaji's greatest, most admired general, he gave him such a tongue lashing that Pratap Rao Gujar went back, and there is that famous battle when just 7 Marathas went and charged the Vijapur army and all of them died. But subsequently the Marathas defeated Behlul Khan. The point is, Shivaji never believed in pity or letting off an enemy, because he knew you let off an enemy, he will gather strength and come back and defeat you, which is exactly what happened to the Marathas. After the British were let off in 1779, quickly they regrouped, and 1781 they again invaded Pune. So this is that contrast between Chhatrapati Shivaji and his strategy, and why Marathas subsequently lost against the British. But there is another angle which we have to understand. In the later period, that is in the early 19th century and late 18th century, technology had started improving. Whereas, unfortunately, we remained dependent on imports of weapon and gunpowder even till that time. It is most interesting, I found the British records where East India Company was supplying gunpowder to the Marathas at the same time that the Marathas were fighting against them. So the question was asked in court of directors by the British as to why are you supplying gunpowder to the Marathas against whom you are fighting. So the answer given by the British was, it is good to keep them dependent on us. If we stop this, they may start manufacturing their own gunpowder, so it is better to control them. Come to 21st century, we start seeing that India has the dubious distinction of being world's largest arms importer from outside. So this business of controlling through this. Second issue was that the guns and firearms were introduced in India as early as 15th century. When the Turks came in, they all had guns. And slowly and surely, the guns started dominating the battlefield. Yet, you will find the Marathas stuck to only swords and cavalry. The guns that the Marathas had were called the matchlock. There used to be a long wick, वात, ती काडी लावायची, ती जळून जेव्हा जाईल तेव्हा गोळी जायची. On the other hand, the British had flintlock, चकमकीचा दगड. Trigger दाबला, गोळी जायची. The difference was, with flintlock guns, you could fire 3 bullets in a minute with certain drills. There used to be people standing, firing, somebody putting in the daru, somebody lying down and getting ready. With a result, whereas the matchlock, you needed 2 to 3 minutes to fire 1 bullet. See the difference. And that is where the Marathas lost on technology. Second was, the British had guns which had exploding shells. They had perfected the art of putting explosives inside a shell, whereas the Maratha guns only had solid shots. Basically, mottha dagad. That's it. Now, in a room like this, तो मोठा दगड एकाच्या डोक्यावरती पडला, at the most you'll kill 1 soldier. But an exploding shell falls into this room, the entire room will be finished. That was a quantum jump in terms of guns. This is something the British guarded that technology with absolute total secrecy. There are, even today, they used to manufacture these at Mazgaon, Mumbai, and Arvind Kadu in South. There are boards they had put up. No person other than the British is permitted to enter this laboratory. No Indian. Nobody was permitted to go anywhere near their laboratories where they used to make these explosions. Today, in the 21st century, you have these technology denial regimes where the Americans don't give you this technology, the Russians don't give this technology. This technology denial business is as old as 18th and 19th century. It is there that the Marathas fell back. And that is where ultimately the British prevailed. The last issue that comes up is politically, the Marathas forgot what again Chhatrapati Shivaji had said. There is a very famous letter he had written to one of his Sardars in Konkan. In Marathi it says, की इंग्रज हे साधे सुधे अडत व्यापारी नव्हेत, त्यांच्या मागे एक मोठी शक्ती उभी आहे. ते एवढे हुशार आहेत की तुमच्या डोळ्यातलं काजळ चोरून नेतील, तुम्हाला पत्ता लागणार नाही. यांच्यापासून सावध राहा. What happened later on was, for a very long time, most of the Indian rulers thought that the British were only traders, and through their trade, they used to get revenue. Marathas, whatever trade British were carrying out, they used to pay taxes to the Marathas, like they were paying to, say, yes, Nizam. So, everybody thought this was a good thing going. It was a revenue source, and they're traders anyway, they are not going to pose any threat. So, British threat was not taken seriously for a very long time by most of the Indian rulers. Otherwise, Bombay, Madras and Calcutta, just three ports, you mean to say, if 3-4 local rulers they had combined, it was not possible to throw them out into the sea? It was possible. In fact, that attempt was done by the Marathas in 1781-82. When Nana Fadnavis had stitched a quadruple alliance of Marathas, Nizam, Tipu and Hyder Ali and Bhosles of Nagpur. And simultaneously, Marathas had attacked Bombay, Hyder Ali had attacked Madras, and Bhosles of Nagpur were to attack Calcutta. That is where Warren Hastings bribed the Bhosles of Nagpur to stay neutral. And that particular attempt failed. This was a very major turning point in Indian history because at that time, the British Empire was on its in its one of the very difficult phases because they were fighting in America. American War of Independence was going on at that time. And all the resources of England were going into America. There was no resource they could spare for fighting in India. And if this concerted attempt would have been done, definitely the British rule could have ended. I mean, one can't guarantee, but there's every chance that they may have come after some more time. But at that point in time, it was a golden opportunity to end the British rule.
In fact, since you mentioned Bhosles, the Bhosles of Nagpur at some point were also controlling part of Orissa as well.
Yes.
So such was the large area that they controlled. So, coming back to the Vadgaon Treaty and also the eventual downfall of Marathas, how will you summarize? Eventually, the British took over Marathas. Was it only technology? Was it loss of strategy or misplaced strategy? Was it some kind of infighting for the Peshwai that led? If you could just summarize, what eventually led to the British taking over, and if you find it appropriate, then some lessons for the current. In the current context as well of how these strategies could be utilized by the nation now.
Yeah. Essentially, the first thing that led to decline and fall of Marathas against the British was they lost the political ideal of Chhatrapati Shivaji. Shivaji Maharaj talked of Hindavi Swarajya. He tried to woo the Rajputs and down south everybody and uniting them with a political ideal of Hindavi Swarajya. Towards the later period after Bajirao, it became a Marathi Daulat empire, and the emphasis was maximum resources and riches should come from north and south into Maharashtra. So Marathas lost political support in rest of India, and they became just one other tax collectors.
And this was at a time perhaps when they were controlling large parts of
Yes.
India, when Maharji Shinde was there in
North India, Central India, and also, I have done fair bit of study of that. Unfortunately, Marathas didn't get too long a period to establish good rule, or what we call today's term good governance, which was the strength of Chhatrapati Shivaji. He established good governance as in contrast to the earlier ruler. Now, person like Mahatji Shinde or Mallarrao Holkar, they had to do two things at the same time. They had to fight wars and also establish administration. The very large part of the correspondence of Mahatji Shinde and Mallarrao Holkar is about trying to establish good administration at village and other levels. For that, they did not get sufficient time. 50, 60 years was too less. So that the support that Chhatrapati Shivaji had, say, in Maharashtra, the Marathas could never gather in the rest of the country. So loss of political ideal. Second most important thing, one of the greatest blunders done by the third Peshwa, that is not third Peshwa actually, Balaji Ballal, that is the son of Bajirao. He, because of his quarrel with Tulaji Angre, actually joined the British in destruction of Maratha Navy. That sounded the death knell of Maratha Empire, because once the Maratha Navy as a force ceased to exist, for the British to move their troops from Bombay to Madras and Bengal to Bombay became easy. And they used this sea lanes fully. And since there was no opposition on sea. So the destruction of Maratha Navy in 1756 was again one of the main reasons. And finally, we had gone into that era where scientific inquiry and progress had taken a back seat. We had lost that. Plus, Chhatrapati Shivaji's time was where his kingdom was all inclusive, in the sense he made sure that all castes and communities were represented in his army. This continued right up to Bajirao the First. It is after Bajirao the First, Balaji, the Nanasaheb Peshwa onwards, this casteism business came in, and Marathas lost out to some extent because of that the unity which Chhatrapati Shivaji had formed could not be sustained. And that created divisions within Maharashtra and between Marathas, which the British naturally as enemies exploited. And finally, with all that, it is not just India or Marathas. Whole of Asia and Africa succumbed to Europe and its domination because of what is called the gunpowder empires. The gunpowder, the guns, they dominated. Look at country like Russia, which expanded from European part right up to Vladivostok, taking most of the Siberia from the Chinese. The British, the French, the Germans together conquered whole of Africa and North and South America, Spaniards. So it was the expansion of Europe's gunpowder empires which took place, to which older civilizations like Indian and the Chinese succumbed because we did not have the scientific progress which Europe had done. And that scientific progress was in the area of warfare as well as other fields of endeavor. That is where the ultimate thing comes in.
Thank you so much, Colonel Athale. And 40 minutes is hardly any time to cover such an important book and as well as a part of the history. But I would encourage all of you to read this book written by Colonel Athale. It is totally engrossing. I'm sure it will be available for sale outside. Just one announcement, one question only, because I have had a message twice, so only we can take only one question, and thereafter one announcement. Taking advantage of Colonel Anil Athale's presence here, we are going to have an informal chat with him in the Ashoka training room about the 1962 Indo-China War. So whoever is interested, please join us. It's just an informal chat between a group. Understand, ask questions. Feel free to share whatever you want to. So, ma'am, just one question from you.
Yeah. Basically, in the Maratha Empire, the Bhosles of Nagpur were Sena Sar Subha, that is the chief of army. And they were equal in status to the Peshwas. And there was always this tussle between the Bhosles of Nagpur and Peshwas, because Peshwa tried to dominate all the others, saying that he's the first among equal. But chief of army, that is Sena Sar Subha, was equal in status. So this friction was there. But at that time, Chhatrapati Shahu, Chhatrapati Sambhaji's son, he had demarcated the area for operation, where the Bhosles of Nagpur were given Bengal and Orissa as their domain. And the Peshwas were to operate up north in Malwa, up to Delhi, and towards the west, up to Satluj. So it is that which was the division of labor. And it is through that the Bhosles of Nagpur, and their army at that time consisted mainly of cavalry. The Nagpur Bhosles did not go much into what Mahatji Shinde did with the modern artillery and guns, etc. The British European style battalions, they did not do it. The Bhosles of Nagpur continued with full complement of cavalry only. Their army was in fact only cavalry. The problem came in, as I had explained little time back, when the more efficient guns came up and this rate of fire increased at 2 to 3 bullets per minute. Foot soldiers standing in a line and firing these were capable of stopping the cavalry charge. So far in warfare, right up to the invention and use of guns, right from Genghis Khan onwards, thousands of horses charging at you, there was no answer. The foot soldiers could never hold. Guns could never hold. But this steel, a line of steel as it was called by the British, created almost a whole screen of lead bullets, which the horse cavalry could never penetrate. And that is where the decline of horse cavalry started and the rise of infantry started, which continued, mind you, right up to First World War 1914. So it was a long period of almost 200 years. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Colonel Anil Athale.
I would be amiss to first thank the organizers here to give me this opportunity, because frankly, I do write a lot, and traveling becomes difficult as one age catches on. But it is a delight to firstly have a chance to interact with the younger people. We have had our innings. The rest, future belongs to you all. And as a contradictory to what we have been hearing about Indian philosophy, peace, etc., etc., I just want to leave you with two small bits. We believe that we won freedom only with non-violent means, etc., etc. But to get a tiny principality of Goa just within about 15 years of our independence, when Satyagraha movement was done against the Portuguese, we failed. Ultimately, we had to send in the army to take Goa. Within 2 months of our independence, we had to fight a war in Kashmir. We had to use force. So, this is the reality of today's world. And unfortunately, the way wars are taking place today, I don't think this era is going to end in a hurry. If we have to be realist, if we want our freedom and independence, we have to be prepared for war, not offensive, but defensive war, yes. Thank you.